Title: The Song Seated in Silence. Year: 183,333,333. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The city of Lithuania had no monuments, no graveyards, no archives. They called it progress. Memory was stored only in code, editable, transferable, disposable. Physical records were burned in the efficiency wars, replaced with digital clarity. But something had begun to go wrong. People were forgetting more than just facts. They were forgetting each other. Into this quiet decay returned the scribe of vanishing things. She had once been the ministry's top redactor and artist of erasure, paid to smooth timelines and polish narratives. But years ago, she disappeared after refusing to wipe a rebel's lullaby from history. Now she walked the shadows of Lithuania, armed not with code, but with ink. At her side moved the scholar of silence, a ghost of the old world, whose voice was never heard but always felt. He remembered what others tried to forget. Together they hunted lost songs, and found their first clue in the hum of the vending machine, 3 notes from an outlawed anthem. Chapter 2. The scribe traced the melody through old circuit nodes, discovering hidden harmonics etched in long, unused firmware microvillages encrypted in everyday appliances. The scholar of silence said nothing, but each time they uncovered a new fragment, he placed a hand over his chest and nodded. They began to map a symphony, one once sung by the children of the resistance, long before the ministry silenced them with compliance chips and curated thought streams. The further they searched, the more interference they faced. Bots glitched, civilians stammered mid-sentence, buildings echoed with feedback that didn't belong. They were close. Finally, beneath the remains of the burnt hall of echoes, they found it. An old piano, untouched by code, buried in ash. The scribe brushed it off, played a chord in every screen, and Lithuania flickered, then cleared, then began to sing. Chapter 3. The minister responded with protocol #0, a full memory purge across sectors. But this time, it failed. The song seated in 1,000 unnoticed places had awakened a collective memory. People remembered birthdays, not algorithms. They recalled voices of those long gone, not their avatars. And with memory returned emotion, and with emotion, resistance. The scholar of silence stepped forward in a broadcast. Though he never spoke, his gaze held the weight of every forgotten name. The scribe read a single sentence from an old diary. Not even death can silence a song seated into your soul. And the city stopped, then breathed, then sang. Lithuania did not fall, and unfolded. Libraries emerged from basements. Cemeteries reopened with gardens. Monuments grew from mosaics of stories once buried in data trash. And in the plaza where the piano now stood, etched into stone, not even death can silence the song seated into your soul. And beneath it, we remember. Therefore, we are. Title: The Chainbreaker. Year: 183,012,820.2. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the port city of Barrow, ambition was currency. Merchants bought influence. Nobles traded heirs for ships. Scholars auctioned discoveries before understanding them. The city pulsed with progress, but it bled beneath the glitter. At the city's edge lived an old blacksmith, once a revolutionary, now forgotten. They called her the Chainbreaker. She had led the uprising that unshackled Barrow's workforce a generation ago, until the victors turned her ideals into slogans and her allies into tyrants. Now she forged tools no one bought and kept records no one read, until the archivist of regret arrived. He bore no title, only a satchel of apology letters never sent and a single question: what if ambition had a mirror? Chapter 2. The Chainbreaker took him to the wall of ledgers and abandoned archives sealed after the revolution. It held the contracts, deals, betrayals, and brides that had redefined the city. We thought we were building the future, she said. Turns out we were just shifting the chains. They opened the vaults. Dust rose. Truth followed. Names etched in bloodless ink: executives who once preached equality, now owning tenements. Generals who demanded unity, now hoarding land. The archivist recorded every page, not to shame, but to remember. They began to publish stories not as attacks, but as questions. Why did the wheel of ambition keep crushing the same bones? Who truly benefited? Chapter 3. At first Mel laughed. Then it paused. Then it split. Protests erupted. So did conversations. Some leaders stepped down. Others doubled down. But the people remembered. They began building cooperatives, not companies. Assemblies, not councils. The Chainbreaker declined every offer to return to power. I had my turn, she said. No, I listened. She left a final mark on the city, a sculpture in the marketplace. forged from melted contract seals. It depicted a hand reaching not upward, but outward. At its base the words, "The world pushes back hardest when you pretend it's not pushing at all." And beneath it, "Ambition without care is just conquest with better PR." Title: The Whispering Constellation. Year: 182,692,307.4. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the coastal city of Talonmer, wisdom was currency, not gold nor grain ideas. Each week, the Grand Pavilion hosted debates under a vaulted sky, scholars clashing with elegance, the rhetoric sharp as glass. Audience votes determined policy, teaching curriculums, even trade decisions. Among these speakers was Ira, the gardener's daughter turned autodidact, known as the trickster who remembers for the way she wove old myths into new arguments. She had never lost a debate, not once, until the constellation arrived. It wasn't a person, but a pattern and arrangement of starlight encoded in a fallen slate uncovered in her garden, and it whispered riddles no scholar could answer. Chapter 2. Ira studied the constellation in silence for days. Its sequence seemed random, but something pulsed beneath it, an unseen logic that slipped from grasp just as it clarified. She brought it to the pavilion. At first, the scholars mocked her. Stars are not scrolls, they laughed, and silence is not wisdom. But when she asked them to interpret the pattern, each gave a different reading, none the same, none complete. Then Ira stood and said, "Perhaps the truth isn't what we shout. Perhaps it's what we're quiet enough to hear." For the first time, the pavilion had no vote, only reflection. Chapter 3. The constellation grew more intricate each night, its pattern evolving not in the sky, but in the minds of those who pondered it. Students left books open on park benches for strangers to annotate. Librarians began hosting listening hours instead of lectures. Ira stepped back from debate, taking to the cliffs to stargaze and journal. Years later, the pavilion's dome was replaced by an open-air platform beneath the stars, its center bore an engraving of the constellation's final form still unresolved. But beneath it, a single phrase, "Purpose visit found it's remembered through resistance." And beneath that, truth humbles the loudest voice. Listen longer. Title: The Unmarked Grave. Year: 182,371,794.5. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. No map in the region marked the village of Norin, not because it was forgotten, but because it chose to forget itself. A haven for exiles and fugitives, it survived by silence. Every newcomer buried their past in a single unmarked grave near the woods. No questions asked, no names spoken. Len, a former city planner with a sealed conviction, arrived with nothing but a broken watch and blueprints of a town that had never been built. He sought anonymity. Instead, he found a problem. Norin was dying not from scarcity, but imbalance. A silent feud brewed between those who remembered and those who refused to. And in the center of it all, a boy had gone missing. Chapter 2. Len's guilt clawed louder than his fear. He began tracing the village layout, looking for patterns. That's when he met the builder of Broken Time, an old woman who claimed to measure decay by how long people avoided each other's eyes. She told him, "You can't bury the past until you name it." Together, they visited the unmarked graves. Len sketched each one, marking them not with names, but with truths. A child once loved, a hand that struck, but vow never kept. The villagers were furious, but curiosity cracked resistance. They began to speak to each other, to themselves, and the missing boy returned on his own, not because he was found, because he was seen. Chapter 3. Norin voted to place a single plaque near the burial site, not to unearth the past, but to honor it. Len was asked to stay. He refused. Instead, he gave them his blueprints, not of the city he once dreamed of, but of the village they had become. Simple, open, connected. The builder of Broken Time vanished one night, leaving behind only the broken watch now ticking at the foot of the largest grave. They carved the message, "Freedom begins with the truth you fear to see." And beneath it, "Community begins with the courage to speak what silence protects." Title: The Clown Who Cries. Starfire. Year: 182,051,281.8. Year: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The city of Valrun was known for silence. Not the silence of peace, but of repression. Grief was frowned upon. Motion was weakness. And in the high towers of the Mindfriend Institute, joy was studied as a chemical, not an experience. But in a square surrounded by gray monoliths, the clown performed nightly paint cracked, eyes alight with sorrow and starlight. He didn't speak. He danced. He mimed. And when night fell, He wept luminous tears, streaks of glowing blue called starfire by the children who gathered to watch. His name was forgotten, but they called him the clown who cries starfire, and some whisper he had once been a doctor. Chapter 2. Arian was a cognitive therapist assigned to monitor the emotional and depth of public displays. Her report shaped city policy, but the clown complicated things. His performances didn't cause measurable harm, but they unsettled people, unsettled her. Each night she returned, notebook in hand, recording his pantomimes. Joy turned tragedy, fear turned release. Then one evening, the clown broke form. He approached her, bashed her shoulder, and handed her a star-shaped fragment of paper, folded like a child's wish. Inside, certainty freezes growth like winter on wet earth. That night, she dreamed of colors Valren had long forgotten. Chapter 3. Arian left her post. She began speaking publicly, not in protest, but in truth. She shared memories. Her father's laugh, her mother's lullabies, the way grief once taught her to breathe more deeply. Others followed. Quiet circle formed meetings for vulnerability and reflection. The Mindframe Institute tried to disband it, but too many had felt something stir, something healing. The clown vanished weeks later. In his square, they built a mosaic from shattered data screens and discarded lead glass. In its center, a smile rendered in shards of starfire resin, etched in the tilework. Certainty freezes growth like winter on wet earth. And below it, kindness thaws the places fear dares not enter. Title: The One Who Drinks Shadow. Year: 181,730,768.8. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The town of Felgrove stood on the edge of light. Beyond its borders stretched the dimming wastelands where shadows weren't cast, but consumed. Travelers spoke of it in hushed tones, where memories blurred and courage thinned. Every generation, Felgrove chose a warden to patrol its boundaries. This time, the role fell to Arlen, a quiet youth with more curiosity than fear. His title came with a relic, a black chalice rumored to absorb shadow. It had belonged to the one who drinks shadow, an ancestor both revered and feared. The chalice pulsed when Arlen touched it, not with hunger, with memory. Chapter 2. At first, Arlen tried to patrol by day, but the shadows were patient. They crept not from the dark, but from within the townspeople. Resentments, regrets, small cruelties whispered behind smiles. He watched friends grow cold, farms soured, laughter dimmed. So he went into the wastes, hoping to understand the chalice's power. There he met the sharp air, a nomad cloaked in broken glass. Shadows feed on truth withheld, they said, but also on truth spoken with venom. Together they wandered the edges, speaking forgotten names into the air, honoring pain without weaponizing it. The chalice grew lighter. Chapter 3. Returning to Felgrove, Arlen didn't give speeches. He listened. He carried the chalice from home to home, asking not for confession, but for stories. A widow's grief, a child's fear, a merchant's quiet shame. The town began to speak not in harmony, but honestly, and slowly the shadows receded. They didn't vanish. They integrated. The dimming wastes retreated a little more each year, replaced by groves of glass fruit and fields of whisper grass. Arlen buried the chalice beneath the first orchard, and etched into the stone above it. The most convincing lies begin with pieces of the truth, and beneath it, so speak your wholeness and watch the dark retreat. Title: The Song Woven from Wounds. Year: 181,410,256.2. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. Mintrel had once been a bard's city, known for its vibrant musicians and echoing stone archways. But over time, the noise faded. Productivity was prized, not poetry. Melodies gave way to metrics, and children were taught schedules before lullabies. Leon, a former choir prodigy turned factory line supervisor, lived in both worlds. He still hummed to himself between shifts, though his co-workers often mocked him. Time is money, they'd say, but Elian didn't hum to pass the time. He hummed to remember who he was. Chapter 2. A workplace restructuring began. More quotas, more surveillance. Elian was offered a promotion if he'd abandoned his old habits and set an example. He accepted, and each day he woke before sunrise, practiced silence, and journaled his doubts. He trained his body to stillness and his mind to clarity, but he never stopped humming, quietly, constantly, even if only in his breath. The change with subtle colleagues who once sneered began asking questions. One by one, others started showing up early, creating art in the margins of lunch breaks, sketching between shifts. Discipline, it turned out, was not the enemy of creativity. It was its backbone. Chapter 3. Leon turned down the next promotion. Instead, he He proposed a communal music room in the old warehouse basement. Management scoffed until production quality began to rise alongside worker morale. Winter began to echo again, not with the old songs, but with new ones. Songs of rhythm, routine, and reverence for inner craft. Leon was never crowned leader, but the people listened and followed. Years later, etched into the entry of the music hall he helped build, above the lintel carved from repurposed gear steel, or words sung into stone. Your deepest knowing requires the death of your shallowest certainty, and beneath it, discipline is the handmaiden of your forgotten music. Title: The Flame Unfinished. Year: 181,089,743.1. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The Kingdom of Haveric thrived on forgetting. Every year, citizens participated in the rite of shedding, casting their worst memories into a massive flame called the Ember Well. In return, they received a year of peace, clarity, and sanctioned ignorance. Only one person never partook: the banished prince. He had once stood next to the flame, prepared to offer up the memory of his sister's death. But the fire refused it. Instead of peace, he received exile. Now he wandered the ashward expanse, where the forgotten truths roamed as phantoms, memories too stubborn to burn, too sharp to bury. He carried a blade that could not cut lies, and a compass that spun toward discomfort. One night, the ground opened beneath him, revealing a voice made of smoke. "You can return," it said, "if you forget what brought you here." He answered by stepping forward. Chapter 2. The Flame Unfinished was a myth, a second Ember Well, hidden in the north, where truth burned slow but bright. It was said to grant not amnesia, but understanding. The prince followed clues through fractured villages and ancient murals, each revealing truths lost to his people. Rebellions recast as riots, leaders erased for kindness, prophecies hidden beneath polished doctrines. He met a girl who remembered being forgotten, a soldier who bore the face of a traitor, but not the heart, and an old man who whispered, "Comfort is the cradle of decay." They joined him, not out of loyalty, out of shared ache. They reached the flame unfinished on the coldest night of the century. It did not roar, it hummed, and in its glow, each offered what they could not forget, not to lose it, to learn from it. Chapter 3. The flame revealed the truth behind the rite. The Ember Well had been a tool not of healing, but control. It devoured guilt, rewrote shame, and pacified rebellion with forgetfulness. Haveric's peace was a sedated wound. The prince stood before the flame unfinished and spoke. If we turn to face it, fear becomes our fiercest mentor. The fire flared not in anger, but recognition. And across the kingdom the Ember Well sputtered. Memories returned like thunder. At first came chaos. Then came tears. Then came voices asking questions never dared. The prince returned not as royalty, but as a reminder. He carried no crown, only a torch, and at the old site of the Ember Well, where lies once danced, now stood a monument of blackened stone. If you turn to face it, fear becomes your fiercest mentor, and beneath it, light remains for those who choose to see even the shadows. Title: The Moth to the Flame. Year: 180,769,230.5. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The town of Bear Hollow didn't appear on maps. Not anymore. It was tucked between bog and bramble, a place spoken of only in warnings and local superstition. The hollow had once been a haven for exiled people, the outside world discarded, but as decades passed and the economy changed, the town was forgotten, except by the watchers. They came once a month, suits, silence. They never spoke to the townsfolk, only left crates marked with government stamps and took notes in small black books. The crates always arrived at night, always half empty, never explained. Aura, a teenager born and raised in the hollow, had questions, and unlike most, she wasn't afraid to ask them. Chapter 2. Aura followed the watchers one night, barefoot and breath held, slipping through moss and rot. They entered a door buried in the hillside, one that the elders said led nowhere good. It opened for the watchers, and closed with a hum. She returned every night after, hoping to see more. On the seventh night, the door opened for her. Inside was not a facility, but a corridor of reflections, mirrors that pulsed with living light. Each reflection showed not Elra, but people like her, torn, tired, unseen. Their mouths moved in silent warning. Employee. At the end of the hall stood a figure, twisted, familiar and wrong. It looked like Elra, but hollowed, smiling too wide, eyes empty of stars. It whispered, "The door you fear may be the one to your freedom." Chapter 3. Elra fled. but the door had already changed her. She began speaking in ways that made people uneasy, bold truths they weren't ready to hear. The hall responded with unease, avoidance, then anger. But Elra didn't stop. She rallied the town's forgotten voices, those denied medical help, education, answers. They gathered at the door, day after day, until the watchers returned. And this time they were afraid. The people tore down the crates, broke the seals, found supplies hoarded for study, not for aid. What followed was not a riot, but a reclamation. The door remains, sealed now, humming beneath overgrowth, but beside it, etched in rusted steel and set in stone. The door you fear may be the one to your freedom, and beneath it, no one truly returns unchanged. Title: The Water That Remembers. Year: 180,448,717.4. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The city of Quenro was built around a silence. Beneath its marble plazas and mirrored towers flowed the river, under murmur banned from mention, charted on no map. Officials claimed it was a myth, yet everyone knew someone who had disappeared into it. They said the river remembered. The threshold keeper had once been one of Quenro's elite cartographers. She now lived in the Warrens, where buildings leaned like eavesdropping elders, and names changed as often as the wind. Her fall from grace came after she published a map that included the undermurmur. It had no labels, only voices. He whispered from beneath the ink. Testimonies, warnings, lullabies. The ministry burned every copy, but the water that remembers found her. It arrived in her teacup scented with jasmine, colored with sorrow. She drank, and remembered everyone she'd forgotten. Chapter 2. The water taught her how to listen, not with ears, but with ache. She walked the streets of the Warrens, her presence alone causing shutters to twitch and windows to open a fraction wider. The marginalized, the vanished, the mistaken, they began to speak again. Their words weren't always coherent, but they echoed with truth. A boy whose laughter turned to static after the ministry took his parents. An elder who claimed the river whispered her name in dreams. A painter whose art bled when she lied. The threshold keeper recorded it all, not in books, but in drops. Each drop of the undermurmur placed into a vial. Each vial sealed with a truth the city would not face. At night, she arranged them in mosaics under bridges. Chapter 3. The ministry tried to drown her message with pageantry and doctrine. They hosted a grand silence, a celebration of unity through muteness. But when the fountains ran that day, the water was wrong. It hummed. The river under murmur had risen. It carried mosaics through canals, scattering them into alleys and temples. Each burst revealed a fragment of a forgotten voice. And the people listened. Not all understood, but they paused. And that was enough. The threshold keeper disappeared soon after, some say into the river, others say into memory. But at the old city well, beneath the no silent ministry dome, a plaque appeared in the morning light. What you leave behind will fade, but who you touched will echo. And beneath it, justice begins when silence ends. Idol, the voice behind the mirror. Year: 180,128,204.9. Year of Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the city of Valera, mirrors were forbidden, not by law but by culture. Centuries ago, the city elders claimed that mirrors capture not just reflections, but truths the world wasn't ready to accept. Instead, polished obsidian and rippling water were used in rituals, and self-image was left to the eyes of others. A young translator who worked at the House of Tongues had never questioned this. She was fluent in 13 dialects and worked to broker peace between dozens of subcultures within Valera. Her job was not to see but to hear. But one day, a shipment arrived from the outlands. Inside, wrapped in silk and incense, was a mirror. Chapter 2. Erin kept it hidden in her room. The first time she looked, nothing happened, just her face, aged slightly by responsibility. But the next night, she heard something. A voice. Faint, soft, her own but different. It didn't echo her speech. It asked questions she had never dared to voice. Why do you serve peace without knowing your own boundaries? Who are you when no one is listening? The mirror didn't reflect light anymore. It reflected memory, fragments of cultural stories she had translated, but never questioned, gestures she'd mimicked, but never understood. The voice whispered, what is gained in a moment can vanish just as fast. Chapter 3. Valera began to fray. Tensions between traditions, long held in silent balance, flared. Erin saw the signs, words lost in translation, gestures taken for offense. She tried to mediate, but her words rang hollow, so she brought out the mirror to the circle of elders, and she listened, not to herself, but to the stories the mirror revealed, the pain in every culture they had muted for harmony's sake, the injustices brushed aside for the illusion of unity. The elders were shaken. but not all resisted change. The mirror was placed in the hall of understanding, not as a tool, but as a reminder. Visitors stepped before it not to see themselves, but to hear the stories that shape those different from them, etched into the frame. What is gained in a moment can vanish just as fast, and below it, understanding must be chosen again each day. Title: The First Empire. Year: 179,807,691.7. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. Siravet had everything. Her image danced across whole banners. Her business empire spanned 3 continents. Her mansion had rooms dedicated to moods she hadn't felt in years. And yet, each night, she dreamed of drowning in silence. The dream always ended the same way. A child's voice whispering, "The first empire to conquer is the one beneath your roots." She ignored it, until it spoke while she was awake. That was the moment her name stopped appearing in the financial clouds. Her assistant vanished. Her schedule evaporated. Only one message remained scrawled across every mirrored surface in her estate. "Find the one who," was written. Chapter 2. Sarah found them in the alley of lost claims, beneath the city's oldest overpass, an archivist who once composed laws, and now lived by breaking sentences apart. "You lost more than yourself," they said, without looking up. "You forgot how to feel." Sarah scoffed, until they handed her a journal. Her own. Pages she'd signed away in youth, emotionally redacted. Sanitized for success. Memories stripped of ache, trimmed of joy. Each page she read returned a tremor to her bones. By the 3rd night she wept, not for what was lost, but for what was never allowed to begin. A veiled seer arrived then, uninvited, soft-footed, eyes like gray old marble. "You've built an empire," they said, "but never a home." Chapter 3. Sarah dismantled her corporation not in fury, but in fragments. She gave employees their stories back, their choices, their names. She returned patents to communities who had inspired them. She removed her likeness from the banners. And one morning, she stood barefoot before a school she had once defended. She taught her first class in silence, letting children draw their dreams on the walls. She never returned to the mansion. Instead, she built a home on a hill with wide windows and no locks. People came not for profit, but for peace. The veiled seer visited one last time, placing a stone in her garden etched with the words, "The first empire to conquer is the one beneath your ribs." And beneath it, build there, rule nothing, love everything. Title: The Whisper That Endures. Year: 179,487,179.3. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. Deep within the winding alleys of Meridian's oldest district stood a nondescript tea house known as the Hollow Whisper. It was not listed in any guidebooks, nor advertised with neon or glyphs. It was passed along by word and trust, by those who needed a quiet place to fall apart and mend. Its owner, an elderly man named Corin, had no past, or so it seemed. His back was bent, his beard silver, and his voice barely more than a breeze through parchment. But he remembered everything, every guest, every tear, every silence that spoke louder than grief. One night, a traveler stumbled in, drenched and shaken. "I don't need tea," she said. "I need to disappear." Corin simply nodded. Chapter 2. The woman, Hiro, returned night after night. She said little, but Corin always set down a different blend, each one tuned to something she hadn't said aloud. Over time, she began to share whispers of exile, betrayal, the burden of power she once misused. She was not a common guest. She had once been a keeper of cosmic law, guardian of balance between realms. But a single failure, a moment of hesitation, had unstitched a world's fate. Corin listened without judgment. Then, one evening, he handed her a folded note beneath her cup. "The biggest battles are the ones fought within ourselves." It wasn't a reprimand. It was a truth she already knew. Chapter 3. Iroh stayed, not as a fugitive, but as a host. Corin passed quietly weeks later, leaving no possessions but a garden of herbs and a journal full of kindnesses rendered. Iroh took over the Hollow Whisper. She didn't speak of her past, but those who entered often found clarity they hadn't known they were seeking. They left lighter, braver. Some returned with friends. Some never needed to come back. And each cup came with a whisper, a reminder etched into the base of every new mug. The biggest battles are the ones fought within ourselves. And below it, kindness is not a cure, it's the echo of a choice made over and over again.